The Olympic Games represent humanity's greatest celebration of athletic achievement. But behind the glory and triumph lies a darker reality that few people know about. Throughout Olympic history, athletes and workers have paid the ultimate price in pursuit of sporting excellence. These are the tragic stories that changed the Games forever, stories of human cost, fatal mistakes, and lessons learned too late. Our first story takes us back to July 14, 1912, in Stockholm, Sweden. The summer heat was suffocating that day, with temperatures climbing toward 90 degrees Fahrenheit and humidity making the air feel thick and oppressive. This was the setting for what would become the deadliest marathon in Olympic history. Among the 69 runners preparing for the 26-mile race was Francisco Lázaro, a 21-year-old carpenter from Porto, Portugal. Lázaro had trained hard in Portugal's temperate coastal climate, but nothing could have prepared him for the brutal conditions awaiting him in Sweden. As the afternoon sun beat down on the course, the asphalt roads radiated heat like an oven, creating a furnace of dust and scorching air. Before the race began at 1:45 in the afternoon, Lázaro made a decision that would seal his fate. Concerned about severe sunburn during the long race, he chose an unusual method of protection. He covered his entire body, head to toe, in a thick coating of beef fat mixed with wax. In his mind, this would act as a protective barrier against the sun's relentless rays. What Lázaro didn't realize was that he had just created a waterproof seal over his skin. The waxy layer would prevent his body from performing its most critical cooling function, evaporating sweat to regulate temperature. He had essentially wrapped himself in a heat trap. As the starting gun fired, Lázaro began conservatively, pacing himself alongside competitors from Sweden, Finland, and South Africa. The first few miles passed uneventfully as the runners moved through the picturesque Swedish countryside. But as the race progressed, the sun climbed higher, and the temperature continued its merciless rise. By the halfway point, the conditions had already claimed several victims. Multiple runners had collapsed from heat exhaustion and were pulled from the course by medical staff. Lázaro pushed forward, but observers began noticing troubling signs. His breathing grew labored and uneven. Beneath the waxy coating, sweat accumulated on his skin but couldn't evaporate. His body temperature was rising with no way to cool down. At the 18.6-mile mark, witnesses reported alarming changes in Lázaro's condition. He was staggering noticeably, his movements uncoordinated and confused. These were textbook symptoms of severe heat stroke. His core body temperature was climbing to dangerous levels as his body's cooling system failed completely. With just 5 miles left in the race, Francisco Lázaro suddenly collapsed on the dusty road near Södertälje. Spectators rushed to help, finding him unconscious and burning with fever. Despite the heat, his skin felt pale and clammy beneath the melted wax that still clung to his body. Swedish medical personnel transported him urgently to Serafimer Hospital in Stockholm. Doctors worked frantically through the night, using every available method to lower his dangerously elevated body temperature. They applied ice, administered fluids, and monitored his vitals continuously. But despite their heroic efforts, Lázaro never regained consciousness. The young Portuguese athlete died the following morning, his body overwhelmed by heat stroke and dehydration. Francisco Lázaro became the first athlete in history to die during Olympic competition. His tragic death sparked immediate changes, leading to mandatory water stations along marathon courses and the implementation of temperature monitoring protocols that are still used today. Fast forward nearly a century to February 12, 2010. The Vancouver Winter Olympics were just hours away from their grand opening ceremony. At the Whistler Sliding Center, athletes were making their final practice runs on what was known as the fastest and most dangerous luge track ever built. 21-year-old Nodar Kumaritashvili from Georgia was preparing for the biggest moment of his athletic career. Luge was in his blood. Both his father and uncle had represented Georgia in the sport. He had trained his entire life for this Olympic opportunity. But the Whistler track had become a source of serious concern. During the training weeks leading up to the Games, the track's reputation had grown increasingly ominous. Speeds regularly exceeded 93 miles per hour on the 4,480-foot course. Several athletes had already crashed during practice. Italian luger Armin Zogler had publicly voiced concerns, calling the track design too fast and too dangerous. Romanian competitor Violeta Stramatururu suffered a concussion after losing control. Other athletes had experienced crashes severe enough to destroy their equipment. Despite these warning signs, the practice sessions continued. At 4:44 in the afternoon, Kumaritashvili began his run from the men's starting position. He lay on his back on the small sled, his body streamlined as he accelerated down the icy track. The first several turns passed normally as his speed increased rapidly. By the time he reached the track's most challenging section, he was traveling at approximately 90 miles per hour, well within the normal range for experienced luge athletes. Then, as he approached turn 15, known ominously as 50-50, something went wrong. Video analysis later showed his sled beginning to drift slightly left toward the outer wall. Kumaritashvili attempted to correct his trajectory by applying pressure with his right leg, but the adjustment came too late and was too aggressive. In an instant, his sled shot up the banking of turn 16, becoming airborne like a projectile. Kumaritashvili was thrown from the sled at more than 87 miles per hour. He flew several yards through the air before striking an unpadded steel support pillar holding timing equipment. The impact was catastrophic, causing massive trauma to his head and chest. Medical personnel arrived within minutes and immediately began CPR, but his injuries were unsurvivable. Nodar Kumaritashvili was pronounced dead at Whistler Healthcare Center at 5:50 in the evening, just hours before the opening ceremony that would have celebrated his Olympic dream. The tragedy led to immediate track modifications, including higher walls and padding around all steel support structures. The starting positions for men's luge were also moved lower on the track to reduce speeds. February 22, 1992, in the French Alps. The Albertville Winter Olympics were featuring speed skiing as a demonstration event, a sport where athletes reach mind-bending speeds exceeding 125 miles per hour. 27-year-old Nicolas Bochatay from Switzerland was in France for this showcase. While not among the sport's elite competitors, he was experienced and respected in the speed skiing community. On this particular morning, Bochatay decided to take a relaxing warm-up run on the regular slopes, away from the specialized speed skiing course. He wasn't wearing his speed skiing equipment, just standard alpine gear for what was meant to be a casual, recreational ski. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, well-groomed slopes, and good visibility. At approximately 10:30 in the morning, Bochatay was skiing down an intermediate slope when the unthinkable happened. A snow grooming machine was operating on the slope, performing routine maintenance. These massive vehicles weigh several tons and feature powerful engines with wide tracks designed to prepare and maintain ski slopes. They're a common sight at any ski resort. What happened next remains partially unclear, but witnesses reported that Bochatay appeared to lose control or misjudge his approach line as he neared the grooming machine. Whether it was a momentary lapse in concentration, an equipment malfunction, or a simple miscalculation, he was unable to avoid the massive vehicle. At his traveling speed, even on an intermediate slope, there was no time for evasive action once he realized the danger. Nicolas Bochatay collided with the rear of the snow grooming machine with tremendous force. The impact caused massive traumatic injuries that were immediately fatal. Despite the quick response from resort personnel and medical teams, survival was impossible. His death sent shockwaves through the Olympic community and led to stricter safety protocols for demonstration events and improved guidelines for separating athlete activities from resort operations during Olympic Games. August 26, 1960, in Rome, Italy. The temperature was a scorching 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Danish cyclist Knud Enemark Jensen lined up for the 62-mile team time trial, completely unaware that he was about to become the first athlete to die from drug use during Olympic competition. The 23-year-old was part of Denmark's four-man cycling team, preparing to tackle a grueling road race through the Italian countryside under a merciless summer sun. Jensen had been taking Roniacol, a blood circulation stimulant that was legal at the time but would later be banned due to dangerous side effects, especially when combined with extreme physical exertion and high temperatures. Many endurance athletes used this medication, believing it improved performance by increasing blood flow. However, its effects in hot conditions were poorly understood and potentially lethal. At 2 in the afternoon, the Danish team began racing from the Forum to Caracalla. Jensen took his turn at the front of the formation as they battled the oppressive heat and challenging terrain. In a team time trial, all 4 cyclists must work together, maintaining high speeds throughout the entire distance. For the first hour, Jensen appeared to be handling the conditions well. He rotated through the paceline smoothly, maintaining the rapid tempo necessary for Olympic-level competition. However, as the race progressed and the afternoon heat intensified, Jensen began showing signs of distress that his teammates initially dismissed as normal racing fatigue. His pedaling became less fluid, and he struggled to maintain his position during his turns at the front. By the 54-mile mark, with just 8 miles remaining, Jensen was clearly in serious trouble. His teammates noticed he was weaving slightly and seemed disoriented. Rather than recognizing the signs of a developing medical emergency, they encouraged him to continue pushing through. With 5 miles left in the race, Jensen suddenly collapsed while still on his bicycle, falling onto the scorching asphalt. His teammates and race officials immediately stopped to help, finding him unconscious with severe signs of heat stroke. His body temperature was dangerously elevated, and his breathing was labored and irregular. Italian medical personnel rushed Jensen to a Rome hospital, where doctors worked desperately to lower his body temperature and stabilize his condition. Despite their intensive efforts, Jensen died several hours later. The cause: heat stroke severely exacerbated by the circulation stimulant in his system. The autopsy revealed that the combination of rhiniacal, extreme heat, and intense physical exertion had completely overwhelmed his body's ability to regulate temperature. His death sparked the first serious discussions about drug testing in Olympic competition, conversations that would eventually lead to the anti-doping programs we know today. January 25, 1964, on Patrickhoffel Mountain above Innsbruck, Austria. 19-year-old Ross Milne from Sydney, Australia, was training on the Olympic downhill course just days before the Winter Games would officially begin. Milne was one of Australia's most promising young alpine skiers, representing his country despite having limited access to world-class training facilities and snow conditions back home. He had arrived in Austria weeks early to acclimatize to the challenging European racing conditions and familiarize himself with the demanding Olympic course. The Patrickhoffel downhill was notorious for its technical difficulty and high speeds. The course featured a vertical drop of over 2,850 feet in sections where skiers routinely exceeded 81 miles per hour. It included several technical sequences with sharp turns and dramatic elevation changes that demanded precise technique and split-second timing. During his training run that morning, Milne was skiing at full racing speed through the upper section. The snow conditions were firm and fast, typical for World Cup-level racing but absolutely unforgiving of any technical errors. As he approached a sharp left-hand turn at high speed, something went catastrophically wrong with either his equipment or his technique. In Olympic-level downhill skiing, the margin for error is virtually zero. Once a skier loses control at racing speeds, recovery becomes nearly impossible. Video footage captured Milne attempting desperately to regain control as his skis drifted wide of his intended racing line. Fighting to bring his skis back under him, he was carried off the prepared racing surface directly into the trees bordering the course. At an estimated speed of over 62 miles per hour, the impact with the trees was catastrophic. Milne struck several large pine trees in rapid succession, suffering massive trauma that was instantly fatal. Ski patrol and medical personnel reached the accident site within minutes, but given the severity of the impacts, survival was impossible. Ross Milne's death shocked the international skiing community and led to significant improvements in downhill course safety measures. These included wider safety margins between racing lines and natural obstacles, better protective barriers, and more rigorous course inspection procedures, standards that are still used in international ski racing today. While athletes face risks during competition, the most overlooked Olympic tragedies involve the workers who build the venues where those competitions take place. The Athens 2004 and Rio 2016 Olympics stand out for their devastating worker death tolls. In Athens, the Greek government's years-long delays due to bureaucratic problems forced contractors into a desperate race against time. Workers labored under extreme pressure, regularly working 16-hour shifts without adequate rest. Safety protocols were frequently ignored in the rush to complete venues before the games began. On March 15, 2004, just months before the opening ceremony, 45-year-old Dimitrios Antonopoulos was working on the Olympic Stadium roof when safety cables failed. Antonopoulos fell 100 feet to his death while installing lighting equipment. 2 months later, on June 2, 2004, 38-year-old crane operator Nikos Georgios died when his crane collapsed while lifting steel beams for the aquatic center. The crane was operating beyond its rated capacity due to construction acceleration pressure, and inadequate ground preparation caused the massive machine to tip over, crushing Georgios in the operator's cab. Official records acknowledge at least 4 construction workers died building Athens Olympic venues, with dozens more suffering serious injuries. The true number may never be known. The Rio 2016 situation was even deadlier. Brazilian authorities acknowledged at least 11 construction worker deaths directly related to Olympic venue construction. On March 27, 2013, Anderson Silva Santos was installing concrete forms at Olympic Park when a 440,000-pound crane collapsed during high winds. The crane was operating in wind conditions that exceeded safety guidelines due to relentless schedule pressure. Santos was killed, and 4 others were injured. On April 3, 2014, tragedy struck again when a section of the Maracana Stadium roof collapsed during installation. Fábio Luis Pereira and Ronaldo Oliveira dos Santos were crushed by falling concrete and steel, victims of inadequate structural support and rushed construction timelines. The most horrific incident occurred on April 21, 2016, when a newly constructed bicycle path built specifically for Olympic cycling events collapsed into the ocean. The elevated path over Guanabara Bay suffered from fundamental design flaws and construction shortcuts. 2 people were killed when the structure suddenly gave way. Brazilian investigators later revealed systemic problems throughout the Olympic construction projects: substandard materials, inadequate safety training, and constant pressure to cut corners to meet impossibly tight deadlines and budgets. These deaths highlighted the often invisible human cost of hosting the Olympic Games and led to improved international oversight of construction safety for future Olympic projects. The Olympic Games celebrate the heights of human achievement, but these tragic stories remind us of the very real risks involved. From athletes who paid the ultimate price in pursuit of glory, to workers who died building the stages where Olympic dreams unfold, these lives were lost in service of the world's greatest sporting event. Their legacies live on in the safety protocols, medical procedures, and construction standards that now protect today's athletes and workers. These improvements ensure that their sacrifices were not in vain, that future generations can compete and build in environments designed with their safety as the top priority. The Olympic motto is Citius, Altius, Fortius, faster, higher, stronger. But perhaps we should add another word: safer. Because no medal, no record, and no games are worth a human life.